Before we dive into each of our discussions about the latest Critical Role episode, we'd like to do a little recap where we boil down the 4 hours or so of the episode down to a 15-20 minute quick recap of the things that happened. And then we typically cut that out as a separate episode or a separate video. And if you're watching just the recap, in the description, we have a link to the full discussion where we want to know what you thought about the episode as well. But having said that, this was episode 113 of Campaign 3 of Critical Role. Do you know the name by chance?
I think it's A Gathering of Legends or something close to that at least.
Very true. Name does justice to what happens in this episode. But essentially, this episode opens up with Bell's Hells in the Mighty Nine in Caleb's Tower the next morning on Ruidus, and sort of figuring out their plan for the day. There are a few things that happen. One, Jester sends a sending message to Rashina, or maybe it was Imogen, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. But Rashina, who was the leader of the Volition, the resistance force on Ruidus, and is basically like, hey, we're back. Oh yeah, we're so back. What do we do now? Where are we going to go? What are we going to do next? And Rashina basically says, hey, we're actually planning a huge attack, a massive bomb of some kind to happen in the next couple of days. If you want to help, go meet Gaz in the Vellums, which was one of these, I think it was like a neighborhood or like a district within Kraviras. So they're like, okay, we have a plan. Let's go teleport to the shop that we first batted down into when we were traveling through the upside streets of the city, the shop that was of the resistance that sheltered them, basically. Before they do that, there are some comments around where Pate is, and apparently Pate was killed or destroyed by Ford by mistake the night before. So Pate is resummoned. And there's also just some very incredible, like off the cuff, moving in and out of characters, players moving between both campaign characters flawlessly as this conversation is happening the morning after. So that's also just a very enjoyable part about this episode. And then the other thing gets mentioned is, hey, we're in the end game. This is kind of like final save point. So let's whip out the harness and let's eat some legendary items, you know? So first they eat Dusk Hunger. Ashton eats this, and this was the legendary blade that the Fae, the Unseelie Fae, Zethuda was wielding. Ashton eats that, or uses the harness. For people who haven't caught up or something, he uses the harness to absorb it. And this gives, I think it was once per short rest, can add 2d6 fire damage to an attack. And I think it also gave him +5 hit points and a +2 permanent increase to Dex. And then they decide to eat another item. Orem eats Ishta, the Summit Blade, the main blade of Odahan Thul. This gives him, I think it was every melee swing, gives him a 1d6 of force damage. Or maybe it was per short rest. I can't remember.
I think it was that to like prone targets or something like that.
I know the prone thing was like how it worked before they ate it, so I wasn't sure if it was still the case after or not.
Yeah, don't quote me on that.
It does make sense. But additionally, he also gets a +2 permanent increase to his dex, puts him past 20, and he has officially the most dex he's ever had in a campaign, more than Vax in campaign 1. So having said that, the harness is still okay. It hasn't been destroyed. They teleport to the shop, and the shop's pretty much cleaned out. In fact, the city as a whole is very, not abandoned, but like people are sort of sheltering in place. It's very tense. And it seems like people are preparing to go to Exandria. Like they're preparing like this mass exodus. As they work through the streets of the city, they want to make it back to the Volition's hideout. They come across this sort of like public shrine where a bunch of items from Exandria have been gathered to sort of like hype people up on like the journey they're about to go on. One of these items is, in fact, the statue of Planesrider Wrenn, who had been petrified in or turned to stone in one of our previous, in the first attack on the Bloody Bridge way before. Greater Restoration is cast. She is, that effect is removed from her, though she still has her missing arm. And she promptly bamps out, like, what's going on? Bamps out, gets away, and Ascending is sent to her to basically be like, hey, we're the good guys. We rescued you. We'll be here if you need us, kind of thing. But she's presumably has left to go back to her plane, though may pop up again in the future. We'll see. Having said that, they moved to the original tunnels. They've basically been destroyed and abandoned. Long story short, they worked their way down into those tunnels back to the original secret base. It's ruined, destroyed. The glass display that they used to see the entire subterranean city of Kerviris is shattered. Arcane Gate is cast for them to go down into the streets, and they eventually reach out to Gaz to say, hey, like, let's meet up. Let's get together. They meet Gaz, who is seemingly like permanently injured from his encounter with Liliana for his mission that he had gone on in a previous episode, and leads them to another hideout where he basically steps into a room where he talks to two unseen voices to be like, hey, Bell's Hells are here. They want to move the plan up for this bomb. Instead of it being a few days, they want it to happen now, but not right now, but in the near future. All that to say, Gaz returns and says, yeah, because of people getting ready to leave, there's less collateral damage. So we are planning this massive bomb for an attack. And then Jester sends a message to Allura to basically be like, hey, we're about to have this massive attack here. Send the troops. It's time. And then we go to break. So why don't you take it from there?
Yes, sir. So I just lost my notes. We pick up with the second half of the episode actually transitioning to Vasselheim and Vox Machina. So the cast is now playing their Campaign 1 characters, but we start first just with Marisha, Laura, Travis, and Ashley around the table. No one else is there. So we pick up with Keyleth first, who it's really late at night in Vasselheim. She's already like done her Voice of the Tempest duties. And now that she's finally got some free time to herself, she goes and meets up with Vex, who is also, staying in a room here while she's on official business as well. So Keyleth meets up with her and is basically like, we got to get the gang back together. We need to go and save Vax. And Keyleth is like, there's a comment about Vex thinking they can save him, and Keyleth is like, I don't know if we can save him. I've kind of made peace with that, but like, we need to get him out of there. He can't stay trapped like that. And so their first point of action is to go get Pike and Grog, who are also in Vasselheim, and their last known whereabouts were at a bar. So Vex and Keyleth head there to the Cluttered Cloister, as it's named, where they're just there kind of messing around, getting drunk. And the four of them share a drink and do a little bit of catching up and talk about getting everybody back together. And Pike reveals, wait, does that include Scanlan? Because he and I aren't on the best of terms right now after our third divorce. So maybe, maybe we don't need Scanlan for this. And so that causes like a big conversation about, whoa, what's going on? And no, it'll be fine. But actually, has anyone even talked to Scanlan? Because come to find out that Keyleth can't get a hold of him. No one has heard from him in a while. So they're not exactly sure how to go about it. And Grog is like, well, just let me talk to him. Like, I'll convince him. So where is he? And we're like, we don't know. So Keyleth tries to scry on him, but it doesn't work. It's rebuked. So Vex is like, okay, well, in the meantime, is there anybody else we should recruit for this? Like, what's Terry up to? And a lot of them aren't really sure. They're like, I think he's still trying to do the Darrington Brigade thing. So he's out. Keyleth then suggests, well, actually, maybe Serkonos, who is the leader of the Fire Ashari. So they leave the bar and decide to go find Serkonos. At which point we see Robbie come and join the table as he is playing Serkonos, also voiced him in Legend of Vox Machina. And they basically recruit him by saying, hey, we're going to the front lines. There's going to be a battle there if you want to join us. And he's basically in immediately. So then the five of them take a portal via Keyleth through a tree to go to Whitestone to collect Percy. So once they arrive, we see Vesper DeRollo, one of their daughters, Vex and Percy's daughters, and she tells her that, hey, we're about to go on a mission. You have to take care of everybody while we're gone. They then run into Percy, fill him in on everything, and he tries to remember where he last heard Scanlan might be, and thinks that it might be with Dr. Dranzel in their traveling band again. And he's like, you should probably try scrying on Kaylee. Like maybe that would give you a clue. So Keyleth does that and sees that Kaylee, and it works, and sees that Kaylee is currently sleeping in a room in an inn where it's night. So they think they're in the other part of the world that they just left from in Vasselheim, basically. They're like, okay, well, what should we do? We know where Kaylee is, but she wasn't with Scanlan. And so they ultimately decide, Pike, you're just going to have to message him because she's the only one with sending. And then they try to decide, well, how am I going to message him? So they kind of like workshop the conversation and ultimately land on that she should pretend it's a booty call, that she's like drunk and hopefully she can get some information out of him. So she does just that, sends him a message and says like, I'm horny and in Whitestone. Where are you? And it's at this point that Sam comes and joins the table. And then as Scanlan responds to this message, and he's like very out of breath in his response and says he's in Wildmount and he hopes she's okay. So Pike then sends another message and is like, well, where in Wildmount specifically? And are you working out? And Scanlan responds, and you can hear him kind of ask around him where he is, and other people respond and say that they're kind of somewhere near Bazazan. So Keyleth then scries on Dr. Dranzel, and this works, and he is with Scanlan, and they can see that they're like kind of out in the open with a bunch of horses. So now that she's seen that, she sees a tree in her scry vision, and they cast Tree Stride to head to him. But before they do that, there's a couple final things in Whitestone. Percy opens a safe, grabs his old iconic mask, and grabs a key from the safe, closes it, and then goes and uses that key and collects a bunch of his gadgets and stuff. Grog tries to break into said safe, but lands in a trap and is forced to run around screaming, I'm trying to steal from Lord DeRollo as like an alarm. And Percy collects all his things. Once he's done, the group head to the Sun Tree to teleport to Scanlan, but not before all of the DeRollo children have been collected to say goodbye, and Percy and Vex kind of tell them, what's going on, you're in charge while we're gone, all that type of jazz. So they say their goodbyes, go through the tree, arrive in Wildmount, I believe, near Bazazan, and come across Scanlan and all of these other people, where they realize that they weren't with horses, they are horses, because Scanlan has turned them all into centaurs in order to travel. And the group of them are actually referred to as the Silver Saddles. And we have Scanlan here, Dr. Dranzel, Kent Plucker, who is also a part of that band, Jameson, the painter, Lionel Gayhart, and finally Keg. So they've been all over Wildmount and have basically been road tripping and playing gigs, I guess, for weeks. And they basically fill in Scanlan on what's going on. And there is a bit of a back and forth on like Scanlan wanting to feel like he's wanted. And it's mostly stemming from the kind of awkwardness between he and Pike being like, well, do you want me to come? Do you want you just for my magic? And ultimately, of course, they tell him that they want him to come for more than just his magic, although some of them jokingly say just the magic. And he agrees to join them to go help try and save Vax. And that is where the episode ends. Again, the episode 113, The Gathering of Legends. And if you're just watching our recap, just a reminder, we got a link to our full discussion that will be in the description below.